The afternoon light filtering through the living room window had a golden quality to it, the kind that made even their cramped apartment feel like it held promise. Mara stood at the kitchen counter, her fingers wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea that had long gone cold. She stared at the steam that no longer rose from it, her mind elsewhere, replaying the conversation she'd just had with her landlord, Mr. Pemberton. "Mara, I'm sorry, but the rent is 3 months overdue." 3 months. "I have been patient, but I have bills too." His voice had been kind but firm, the tone of someone who'd reached the end of their rope. Mara had stood there, phone pressed to her ear, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. 3 months? She'd whispered, her voice barely audible. "But I gave Chelsea the money every month. She said she was handling it." There had been a long pause on the other end. Then, gently, "Mara, I haven't received a payment since February. That's $4, $500. If I don't get it by the end of the week, I'll have no choice but to start eviction proceedings." Now, standing in the kitchen, Mara felt the weight of those words pressed down on her shoulders like a physical force. Chelsea. Her roommate of 2 years. Her friend, or so she'd thought, the person who'd promised to take care of everything, while Mara focused on her demanding job as a pediatric nurse at St. Michael's Hospital. Mara set the mug down with a trembling hand and walked slowly toward Chelsea's bedroom door. It was slightly ajar, revealing an empty room. No clothes in the closet, no toiletries on the dresser, no sign that anyone had ever lived there at all. Chelsea had left 3 days ago, claiming she was going to visit her sick aunt in Portland for the weekend. She'd hugged Mara at the door, her smile warm and reassuring. "I'll be back Monday, promise. Don't eat all the ice cream without me." But Monday had come and gone. Then Tuesday. Now it was Wednesday afternoon, and Mara's texts and calls went straight to voicemail. A cold knot of dread had been forming in Mara's stomach for days, but she'd pushed it down, told herself she was being paranoid. Now, staring at the empty room, she knew. Chelsea wasn't coming back. Mara's legs felt weak. She sank onto Chelsea's abandoned bed, the mattress creaking under her weight. Her hands shook as she pulled out her phone and opened her banking app. She'd been avoiding it, terrified of what she might find, but she couldn't hide anymore. The screen loaded. Her checking account balance stared back at her. $342.67. That was it. That was all she had. She'd been giving Chelsea $1.500 every month for her share of the rent, plus utilities. 6 months. Worth $9,000. Gone. But it was worse than that. Much worse. Over the next hour, as Mara forced herself to dig through emails and old statements, the full scope of the betrayal revealed itself like a nightmare unfolding in slow motion. Chelsea had been using Mara's name. She'd opened credit cards, 3 of them, using Mara's information. The bills, sent to the apartment, had been intercepted and hidden. The balances were maxed out. $3,000 on one, $5,000 on another, $2, $500 on the third. Mara's vision blurred with tears as she read the statements. Designer handbags, expensive dinners, a weekend trip to Miami, all charged to cards Mara didn't even know existed, all in her name. The total damage? Nearly $20,000 in debt, plus the $4,500 owed to Mr. Pemberton. Mara doubled over, a sob tearing from her throat. She trusted Chelsea. They'd laughed together, cooked together, stayed up late, watching terrible reality TV and eating popcorn. Chelsea had been there when Mara's mother passed away last year, had held her while she cried, had promised, "We're family now." How could someone do this? How could someone smile to your face while systematically destroying your life? The apartment suddenly felt suffocating. The walls seemed to close in, the air thick and hard to breathe. Mara stumbled to the bathroom and splashed cold water on her face, her reflection in the mirror almost unrecognizable. Her dark brown eyes, usually so warm and full of life, looked hollow. Her olive skin had taken on a grayish pallor. At 32, she suddenly looked 10 years older. She gripped the edge of the sink, her knuckles white. "What am I going to do?" she whispered to her reflection. The next few days passed in a blur of panic and desperation. Mara filed a police report, though the officer who took her statement was sympathetic but not optimistic. Identity theft and roommate fraud. It's tough to prove, and even tougher to recover the money. Chelsea could be anywhere by now. Mara contacted the credit card companies, spent hours on hold, explained her situation over and over to different representatives. They opened fraud investigations, but the process would take months. In the meantime, the debt remained in her name, and the collection calls had already started. She tried to negotiate with Mr. Pemberton, explaining everything, showing him the police report. He was sympathetic, genuinely so, but he had his own mortgage to pay. "I can give you 2 weeks, Mara. That's the best I can do. I'm sorry." 2 weeks. 14 days to come up with $4,500 or face eviction. Mara picked up extra shifts at the hospital, working 12-hour days until her feet ached and her eyes burned with exhaustion. But even with the overtime, she'd only scraped together maybe $2,000. It wasn't enough. Nothing was enough. On the 10th day, Mara sat at her small kitchen table, surrounded by bills and statements, her laptop open in front of her. She'd been researching bankruptcy, her heart sinking with each article she read. Was this her life now? Ruined credit, potential eviction, financial devastation, all because she'd trusted the wrong person. A notification popped up on her screen, an email from her childhood friend Sophie, with the subject line, "Check this out." Mara almost deleted it. She didn't have the energy for cheerful forwards or inspirational quotes, but something made her click. The email contained a link to an article, "How I Turned My Spare Room into a Thriving Airbnb Business and Paid Off My Debt in 6 months." Mara stared at the headline. A spare room. She had a spare room. Chelsea's room, empty and abandoned. She clicked the link and began to read. The article was written by a woman named Jennifer, who'd found herself in dire financial straits after a divorce. She'd started hosting travelers in her extra bedroom, and within months, she was not only covering her rent, but actually making a profit. The income had allowed her to pay off credit card debt, rebuild her savings, and eventually quit her soul-crushing corporate job. The key, Jennifer wrote, is creating an experience, not just providing a bed. Make your guests feel welcome, safe, and special. That's what they'll remember. That's what they'll pay for. Mara read the article 3 times, her mind racing. Could she do this? Could she really invite strangers into her home? The alternative was eviction and financial ruin. She opened a new tab and typed Airbnb hosting guide into the search bar. The transformation began the next morning. Mara called in sick to work, something she almost never did, and stood in the doorway of Chelsea's former room, a notebook in her hand, and determination burning in her chest. If she was going to do this, she was going to do it right. The room was bare bones. A mattress on a simple frame, a small nightstand, a rickety dresser with a drawer that stuck. The walls were a dingy off-white, scuffed and marked from years of tenant turnover. The single window looked out onto the building's courtyard, where a struggling tree fought for sunlight between brick walls. It wasn't much, but it was hers, and she was going to make it into something beautiful. First, she deep cleaned. She scrubbed every surface until her hands were raw, vacuumed every corner, washed the windows until they gleamed. The physical work felt good, therapeutic even. Each stroke of the cleaning cloth like wiping away a piece of the betrayal. Next came the shopping, but Mara's budget was practically non-existent. She couldn't afford to buy everything new, so she got creative. At thrift stores and garage sales, she found treasures. A vintage brass lamp with a cream-colored shade, $8. A beautiful throw pillow with intricate embroidery, $3. A framed print of a peaceful forest scene, $5. She bought a can of warm, welcoming sage green paint on clearance and spent an entire day painting the room, her arms aching by the end, but her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. She scoured Facebook Marketplace and found a woman giving away a gently used area rug, soft, plush, in muted tones of cream and blue. Mara drove across town to pick it up, and when she laid it on the floor of the guest room, the space instantly felt cozier, more intentional. In her own closet, she found extra linens, good quality sheets she'd received as a Christmas gift but never used, still in their packaging. She washed them in lavender-scented detergent and made the bed with careful precision, adding the embroidered pillow and a soft fleece throw blanket she'd been keeping in storage. On the nightstand, she placed the brass lamp, a small potted succulent, a gift from a coworker, and a handwritten note on cardstock. Welcome. Make yourself at home, Mara. She hung the forest print on the wall, added a small bookshelf she'd found for $10, and filled it with paperback novels and travel guides. In the corner, she placed a wooden coat rack, another garage sale find, and hung 2 fluffy white towels and a robe. When she finally stepped back to survey her work, Mara felt a flutter of something she hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope. The room was no longer Chelsea's abandoned space. It was no longer a reminder of betrayal. It was a sanctuary, warm and welcoming, a place where a weary traveler might feel safe and cared for. It had cost her less than $200, but it looked priceless. Creating the Airbnb listing felt surreal. Mara sat at her laptop, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, suddenly nervous. What if no one booked? What if she'd wasted her time and money? What if she wasn't good at this? But then she thought of Mr. Pemberton's kind but firm voice. End of the week, Mara. She began to type. Title: Cozy private room in the heart of the city, a home away from home. Description: Welcome to your peaceful retreat in the city. This thoughtfully designed private room offers a comfortable queen bed with premium linens, a dedicated workspace, and all the amenities you need for a relaxing stay. I look forward to hosting you. She uploaded the photos she'd taken: the inviting bed with its crisp white sheets and colorful pillow, the warm glow of the brass lamp, the sunny window with the little succulent on the sill. Each photo was carefully staged to show not just a room, but a feeling: warmth, safety, care. Her hand trembled slightly as she set the price: $65 per night. It was competitive for the area, affordable, but not suspiciously cheap. She took a deep breath and clicked Publish. The listing went live. Now, all she could do was wait. The first booking came 36 hours later. Mara was at work, exhausted from a long shift in the pediatric ward, when her phone buzzed with a notification. She glanced at it during her break, and her heart leapt into her throat. You have a new reservation. Daniel M. will be arriving Friday for a 3-night stay. 3 nights at $65. After Airbnb's fees, she'd clear about $175. It wasn't a fortune, but it was a start. It was hope in numerical form. Mara read Daniel's profile. He was a software consultant traveling for work, 5-star reviews from previous hosts, a kind smile in his profile photo. His message was polite and straightforward. Looking forward to staying. I'll arrive around 6 p.m. on Friday. Thanks. She replied immediately, her fingers flying over her phone's keyboard. Welcome, Daniel. I'm so glad to have you. I'll make sure everything is ready. See you Friday. That evening, Mara could barely contain her nervous energy. She cleaned the guest room again, even though it was already spotless. She stocked the small coffee station she'd set up in the kitchen with fresh beans, various teas, and a plate of homemade cookies. She printed out a list of local restaurant recommendations and placed it on the nightstand. Friday arrived. Mara left work early, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and terror. What if Daniel didn't like the room? What if she'd forgotten something crucial? What if this whole thing was a mistake? At 6:15 p.m., the doorbell rang. Mara opened the door to find a man in his early 40s, wearing a button-down shirt and carrying a small rolling suitcase. His smile was genuine and warm. Mara? Daniel, welcome. She stepped aside, her own smile feeling a bit shaky but real. Come in, please. She gave him a quick tour. The guest room, the bathroom, the kitchen. Help yourself to anything, she said, gesturing to the coffee station. And if you need recommendations or have any questions, I'm usually home in the evenings. No pressure to chat, though. Your privacy is totally respected. Daniel set his suitcase down in the guest room and looked around, his expression thoughtful. Mara held her breath. This is really nice, he said finally, his voice sincere. Honestly, I've stayed in a lot of Airbnbs for work, and this is one of the most welcoming. You can tell someone actually cares. Mara felt warmth flood her chest, relief and pride mixing together. Thank you. That means a lot. That night, as Mara lay in her own bed, she could hear the faint sounds of Daniel settling in next door. It felt strange. Having someone in Chelsea's old room, someone who'd paid to be there, someone who appreciated the space she'd created. For the first time in weeks, Mara fell asleep, feeling something other than despair. Daniel checked out on Monday morning, leaving behind a glowing 5-star review. Mara is a wonderful host. The room was exactly as described, clean, cozy, and thoughtfully prepared. She was warm and welcoming, but also respectful of my need for quiet work time. The location is perfect, and the little touches, fresh cookies, local recommendations, made a big difference. Highly recommend. Mara read the review 3 times, tears pricking her eyes. Someone had seen her effort. Someone had appreciated what she built from the ruins of her life. The bookings started coming more steadily after that. A couple celebrating their anniversary. A graduate student attending a conference. A woman visiting her elderly father in a nearby nursing home. Each guest brought their own story, their own needs, and Mara found herself rising to meet them. She learned quickly. She discovered which breakfast items guests appreciated most. Fresh fruit and yogurt were always hits. Which local coffee shop to recommend? The one on Maple Street with the incredible cinnamon rolls. How to anticipate needs before guests even asked. More importantly, she learned about people. There was Margaret, a retired teacher in her 70s, traveling alone for the first time since her husband's death. She'd been nervous about using Airbnb, worried about safety and unfamiliarity. Mara spent an evening talking with her, sharing tea and stories, and when Margaret checked out, she hugged Mara tightly. "You made me feel brave again," she whispered. There was James and Kenji, a couple who'd just gotten engaged and were visiting the city to look at wedding venues. They were so full of joy it was almost contagious, and Mara found herself laughing with them, helping them plan their day, feeling their happiness seep into the apartment's walls like sunlight. There was Sophia, a young woman who just started a new job and was looking for permanent housing. She stayed for 2 weeks, and in that time, she and Mara became friends. Sophia was a graphic designer, and one evening, she offered to redesign Mara's Airbnb listing photos and create a small welcome guide. "You've been so kind," Sophia said. "Let me give back." The new photos were stunning, professional-looking, and within days of Sophia updating the listing, bookings increased noticeably. Money began to flow in, not a flood but a steady stream. $400 one week, $500 the next. Mara opened a separate savings account and funneled every dollar of Airbnb income into it, watching the balance grow with a mixture of disbelief and fierce determination. She paid Mr. Pemberton the overdue rent in full 6 weeks after Chelsea had left. His relief was palpable. "I'm proud of you, Mara," he said, and she'd had to excuse herself to cry in the bathroom. Next came the credit card debt. She contacted each company, set up payment plans, and began chipping away at the balances. $200 here, $500 there. It was slow, painstaking work, but it was progress. Real, tangible progress. 3 months into her Airbnb journey, Mara had a revelation. She was sitting at her kitchen table, reviewing her finances, and she realized something stunning. She'd made more money from hosting in the past 3 months than Chelsea's rent contributions would have provided. Not only was she covering expenses, she was actually profitable. More than that, she was happier. The apartment felt alive again. It wasn't just a place she slept between hospital shifts. It was a home she was proud of. A space she'd intentionally crafted. Each guest left their mark. Not in a bad way, but in the energy they brought, the stories they shared, the gratitude they expressed. Mara found herself looking forward to new arrivals, to learning about their lives, to playing a small part in their journeys. The loneliness that had haunted her since her mother's death, the isolation that Chelsea's betrayal had deepened, began to lift. She wasn't alone anymore. She was connected to her guests, to her growing community of fellow Airbnb hosts she'd met in online forums, to the life she was building with her own hands. One evening, a guest named Patricia, a life coach in her 50s, sat with Mara over coffee. They'd been talking about Patricia's work, and she'd turned the conversation to Mara's story. "You know what's remarkable?" Patricia said, her eyes thoughtful. "You took something that was meant to destroy you, this betrayal, this debt, and you alchemized it. You turned it into gold. That's not just resilience, Mara. That's transformation. Mara had never thought of it that way. She'd been so focused on survival, on putting one foot in front of the other, that she hadn't stepped back to see the bigger picture. I was just trying not to drown, Mara admitted. But you didn't just stay afloat, Patricia countered. You learned to swim. And now you're teaching others, through your hospitality, your kindness, that it's possible to rebuild. Whether you realize it or not, you're giving people hope. That night, lying in bed, Mara thought about Patricia's words. Transformation. Hope. Gold. She thought about Chelsea, a thought that no longer brought the sharp stab of pain it once had, but rather a dull ache, like an old injury that had healed but left a scar. She wondered where Chelsea was, if she ever felt remorse, if she understood the devastation she'd caused. But mostly, Mara realized, she didn't think about Chelsea at all anymore. She thought about Margaret's courage, about James and Kenji's joy, about Sophia's friendship. She thought about the guest arriving tomorrow, a musician traveling for a gig, and the fresh flowers she'd bought to brighten the room. She thought about the savings account that now held nearly $8,000, money she'd earned through her own effort, her own creativity, her own refusal to give up. She thought about the life she was building, brick by brick, guest by guest, choice by choice. 6 months after Chelsea's disappearance, Mara received an unexpected email. The subject line read, "I'm sorry." Her hand froze over her laptop's trackpad. She recognized the email address. Chelsea. For a long moment, Mara just stared at it. Part of her wanted to delete it without reading, to refuse Chelsea even this small intrusion back into her life. But curiosity, and perhaps a need for closure, made her click. The email was long, rambling, filled with excuses and half-hearted apologies. Chelsea was in California, apparently, staying with a boyfriend Mara had never heard of. She claimed she'd gotten in over her head with spending, that she'd panicked and made terrible decisions. She said she was working on getting help and hoped Mara could find it in her heart to forgive. There was no mention of repayment, no concrete plan to make amends. Just words. Empty, self-serving words. Mara read the email twice, then closed her laptop. She felt nothing. Not anger. Not sadness. Not even relief. Just a profound indifference. As if Chelsea were a character from a book she'd read long ago and barely remembered. She didn't respond. There was nothing to say. Chelsea had taken enough from her. She wouldn't give her any more emotional energy. Instead, Mara opened her Airbnb app and reviewed her upcoming bookings. Next week, a family visiting for a child's surgery at St. Michael's, the very hospital where Mara worked. She'd already researched resources for them, compiled a list of affordable meal options nearby, made a note to stock the kitchen with kid-friendly snacks. This was where her focus belonged. Not on the past, but on the present. On the people she could help, the connections she could forge, the life she was actively creating. 1 year after the betrayal, Mara stood in what had once been Chelsea's room and smiled. The space had evolved. She'd added more personal touches. A small bookshelf filled with local guidebooks and novels, a framed map of the city with her favorite spots marked, a Bluetooth speaker for guests who wanted music. Fresh flowers sat on the nightstand. She replenished them weekly now, a small luxury that guests consistently mentioned in reviews. Her Airbnb listing had over 100 5-star reviews. She was a superhost, Airbnb's designation for excellent hosts, and her calendar was booked solid for the next 2 months. More importantly, she'd paid off all the fraudulent credit card debt. Every single dollar. Her credit score, which had plummeted to devastating lows, was slowly climbing back up. She'd even started a small emergency fund, money that was hers and hers alone, untouchable, sacred. But the numbers, as satisfying as they were, weren't the real transformation. The real transformation was in Mara herself. She'd discovered a talent she never knew she possessed: hospitality. Not just providing a bed, but creating experiences, making people feel seen and cared for. She'd started a blog, Hosting from the Heart, where she shared tips for new Airbnb hosts and stories from her journey. It had gained a small but dedicated following, and brands had started reaching out about partnerships. She'd also cut back her hours at the hospital, not because she loved nursing less, but because she'd found she could afford to prioritize her mental health and her new business. She worked 3 12-hour shifts a week now instead of 5, and the balance felt sustainable, nourishing. She'd made new friends through hosting, not just guests, but other hosts in the city. They met monthly for coffee, sharing tips and challenges, celebrating wins and supporting each other through difficulties. It was a community she'd built from scratch, born from necessity, but sustained by genuine connection. One afternoon, Mara received a message through Airbnb from a potential guest. "Hi Mara, I'm reaching out because your listing caught my eye, but I'm really writing because I read your blog. I'm going through something similar. My ex-husband left me with a mountain of debt, and I'm terrified. Your story gave me hope. I'm considering starting my own Airbnb, but I'm scared. Could we talk? I'm happy to book a stay just to pick your brain. Thank you for sharing your journey so openly." The message was from a woman named Lauren, and as Mara read it, tears filled her eyes. This was the gold Patricia had talked about. Not just the money, though that mattered. The real gold was in the transformation, her own, and now, potentially Lauren's. Mara replied immediately, offering not just a booking, but a mentoring session, resources, encouragement. "You can do this," she wrote. "I know it feels impossible right now, but I promise you, there's a path forward. Let me help you find it." The night Lauren checked in, Mara made her favorite tea. Chamomile, the same kind she'd been drinking that terrible afternoon a year ago, when the truth about Chelsea had crashed down around her. She'd come so far. From that moment of devastating betrayal to this moment of empowered purpose, the journey had been painful and difficult and absolutely worth it. Lauren arrived at 7 p.m., looking tired and anxious, her eyes holding the same haunted quality Mara's had once held. Mara welcomed her warmly, showed her the room, then invited her to sit in the kitchen. Over tea and homemade cookies, Lauren poured out her story. Mara listened, nodding, offering tissues when Lauren cried, and when Lauren finally paused, exhausted from the telling, Mara reached across the table and took her hand. "I know exactly how you feel," Mara said gently. "That fear, that sense that you'll never recover, that you can't trust anyone. I've been there. But I promise you, this isn't the end. It's actually a beginning, though it doesn't feel like it yet." "How did you do it?" Lauren whispered. "How did you not just give up?" Mara thought about that question. There'd been days she'd wanted to give up, moments when the weight of it all felt crushing. But there'd also been something else, a stubborn spark that refused to be extinguished. "I got angry," Mara admitted. "Not the destructive kind of anger, but the kind that says, 'Number, you don't get to destroy me.' And then I channeled that anger into action, small actions at first. Cleaning a room, buying a lamp, writing a listing. But each small action built on the last until I'd created something bigger than the betrayal." She smiled, squeezing Lauren's hand. "You have that same spark. I can see it. You're here, reaching out, trying to find a way forward. That's not giving up. That's fighting. And I'm going to help you fight." They talked late into the night, Mara sharing practical tips, pitfalls to avoid, resources that had helped her. But more than that, she shared hope, the lived, embodied hope of someone who'd walked through fire and emerged not just unburned, but stronger. When Lauren finally went to bed, thanking Mara with tears in her eyes, Mara sat alone in her kitchen, the apartment quiet except for the gentle hum of the refrigerator. She looked around at the space, the warm lighting, the plants thriving on the windowsill, the photos of happy guests on her bulletin board. She thought about the money in her savings account, the debt she'd conquered, the business she'd built. But mostly, she thought about the person she'd become. A year ago, she'd been someone who trusted too easily, who let others handle things, who didn't believe she had the strength to stand on her own. The betrayal had stripped that person away, painfully but completely. In her place was someone new, a woman who knew her worth, who trusted her instincts, who discovered she was capable of far more than she'd ever imagined. A woman who could turn devastation into opportunity, debt into prosperity, loneliness into connection. Chelsea had tried to destroy her, Instead, she'd inadvertently forced Mara to discover her own power. There was a bittersweet irony in that, Mara thought. The worst thing that had ever happened to her had also become, in a strange way, one of the best. She wouldn't wish betrayal on anyone. The pain had been real, the fear overwhelming. But standing on the other side of it, having walked through the fire and emerged transformed, Mara felt a deep gratitude for the journey. Not for the betrayal itself, but for what she'd discovered within herself in response to it. She pulled out her journal, a practice she'd started months ago, and began to write. Dear future me, if you're reading this during a difficult time, I want you to remember where you've been. Trust yourself. You've earned it. With love, Mara. She closed the journal and stood, stretching, feeling the pleasant exhaustion of a full day. Tomorrow, a new guest would arrive, a photographer traveling for an assignment. Mara had already planned to leave a list of the city's best views and hidden photogenic spots. She walked to the guest room door and peeked inside. The soft glow of the nightlight illuminated Lauren's sleeping form, peaceful now, perhaps dreaming of her own transformation. Mara smiled and quietly closed the door. She walked to her own bedroom, climbed into bed, and as she drifted off to sleep, her last thought was simple and true. I turned it into gold.